Mike, and we saw some of that enthusiasm in the earnings from big tech. Markets are up across the board since end of March. Mike Lee, your reaction?
Yeah, so in terms of markets, we came into this quarter expecting 13% earnings growth. We're tracking at north of 27, which is really, really spectacular. But what Kevin's referring to in the 6% number may seem eye-popping. But if you look at the top four hyperscalers for artificial intelligence, which is Meta, Google, Amazon, and sorry, I'm blanking on the other one, but they're looking at $700 billion or more over the next 12 months. It's just four companies. It doesn't include Oracle. That doesn't include the investments NVIDIA is making. That doesn't include the investments that Micron is making, building out a new fab factory here. So building out the data center and the components for these data centers in itself can represent 3% growth in GDP outside. And then when you look at the record number of oil production and the exports that we're going to have, we've never produced more oil. We've never exported more oil. And that doesn't include the incentives from the big, beautiful bill and the regulatory reform and all the other things that are happening in this country. So that's not an outlandish number, that 6% GDP growth that we're happening. And this is looking like years to come in terms of this data center build out.
Well, you're talking about Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, and Meta, right? Those are the hyperscalers spending all that money, Mike.
Except for Apple. Apple is letting everyone else build, and they're just gonna charge people for using all the applications on their phone. But all those hyperscalers, and Oracle doesn't get included in those numbers, and Oracle could be another $100 billion on top of that. So these are eye-popping numbers. This is going to be on par with building out the railroads going back 150 years. This is one of the largest capex cycles we've ever seen in the history of the United States, and artificial intelligence should lead to the biggest productivity boom that we have ever seen here. So look, it is an exciting time to be an investor, to be an American, and looking at what's in front of us.
Well, look, no doubt AI will come up in the conversations in China. I'm surprised that the president is keeping this trip, but I guess some people are talking about the potential for 5 additional GOP seats.
Yeah, well, Maria, it should be better, and these states in the Sun Belt need to be more aggressive. Look at what the Democrats will do the second they get power, right? And I too was surprised, like the Democrats, that the Virginia Supreme Court overturned that. And so the Republicans, like in states like South Carolina, we saw what happened in Indiana last week for those Republican state legislators that didn't want to go ahead and redraw the maps there. And what you need to keep in mind, and what everyone needs to keep in mind, is the 2020 census was not done correctly. Okay, the Republicans should have at least a dozen more seats in Sunbelt states in 2030 if they can get the census done without illegals correctly to reflect the population movements out of states like California, out of states like New York, to states like Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, where they intentionally undercounted many rural voters. Okay, you're looking at a 25 to 30 seat movement, okay, as well as a Republican not having to carry Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, or Michigan to win a presidential election. Okay, this changes the entire thesis and the entire movement of the Democrats, because you have to remember when you see them talking on the Sunday shows about the racism or illegitimacy of the Supreme Court, the issue is never the issue. The issue is the revolution. They want total and complete, unadulterated power, and they will say anything and do anything to get it. And the perfect example of that is Virginia. Abigail Spanberger told you when she was campaigning she wasn't going to redraw the maps, and then boom, 3 or 4 months in, 10-1. Like this is how they will act. Not only if they regain the House, but if they take the presidency in 2028 and they get 50 in the Senate and 1 extra seat in the House, this country is done for, because these people have no morals, they have no qualms, they will do anything and everything to take absolute power of the entire country.
Well, they've already said they want to remove the filibuster. So that's why President Trump says the Republicans should do it first, because the Democrats are going to do it. Why do you think Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin left the party altogether? But what do you make of this? The former Vice President Kamala Harris now, according to reports, pressuring the Democratic National Committee to disclose the 2024 election post-mortem. She blew through $1 billion, right, Mike?
Yeah, Maria, the reason why she's surging in the polls is because we never hear from her. Right? As soon as she opens her mouth, like, that's going to reverse itself very quickly. And, like, look, this is going to be a really interesting election cycle for the Democrats, because this will be the first competitive primary in over 20 years, right? So it was a 2008 election where they actually had a primary in 2016, in 2020, 2024. Those were all fixed. Right? None of those were competitive. So this will, I mean, look, and it'll be nice to see these people, how far left they're going to go and them tearing themselves apart. But it doesn't matter if the Republicans can't carry the Rust Belt.
Great point. All right, look, Intel is up again. The government is making more money on that 10% stake with another rally in Intel shares this morning. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, check out Mark and Scott Bessent the other day told me they've already made $30-40 billion, and that number goes up this morning with another 5.5% gain in Intel, Mike.
Yeah, Maria, the infrastructure demand for artificial intelligence is insatiable, all right? And, you know, it's something that I've been harping on for over a year now, that all the components of this, okay, all the chip makers, the memory, and like what you're seeing with Intel, who it's taken some time, but they're pivoting their business to be able to serve this market, coming up with deals with NVIDIA so that they can participate in what we need here. So a token is 3/4 of a page of a large language model, all right? And so what you get from the NVIDIA GPUs and all these other chips, and what the memory, the Micron and the DRAM, all that stuff is needed for, is to support the compute, which generates the tokens. Token demand is expected to increase by a factor of 24 over the next 3 years, and there is upside to that. So you're finally seeing the market really wake up to what's going on the infrastructure side of this. And so it's very difficult to build a data center. It's very difficult to find GPUs. It's very difficult to find memory, which is going to preserve pricing power, and that's likely to continue for years. If you look at AMD stock and how much that stock has moved, it essentially didn't move for 2 years, and then it's just been a rocket ship. The same with Broadcom, the same with Marvell, and you're seeing it with Intel, and then obviously NVIDIA, shockingly, has been the laggard. I would say if you have $1 to put to work here and you're looking in this space, NVIDIA is a steal here. It's probably trading in the area of 15 to 16 times next year's earnings. And so to be able to buy it here, like historically, that forward PE multiple has been between 35 and 40. So you're trading at less than half of their historic multiple. And this isn't going to stop. Okay, all of these things are capacity constrained, which is going to preserve pricing power. And even with these companies stretching their manufacturing chains, their supply chains, you're not going to get an abundance and an overbuilt for at least 3 years, likely 5 or 6, which means there's so much room to run here as the entire world changes in relationship to artificial intelligence. So it's an easy play, in my opinion, to get involved in these names, even as high as they are. You're seeing record high call buying on all these names on the S&P 500 right here, right now.
Can you believe that Intel has added roughly $340 billion to $350 billion in market value just since the end of March? Okay, these stocks are on the move. You blink, you miss it. John Fetterman has courage and strength and leadership, and it's impressive.
Yeah, well, look, not when it comes to voting, but certainly about stating the obvious. And like when you're conducting a Bolshevik revolution, which is what's going on in the Democratic Party, again led by Neville Singman, who we were talking about earlier, on behalf, like running no king's rallies on the behalf of the Chinese Communist Party, you need to go after the power structure, and the power structure viewed as the left as straight white men. And so these young men in their 20s have been told they're the problem for most of their lives throughout their public school educations, and they've just had enough. And unfortunately, this war in Iran has turned a lot of them off, as well as the Epstein files, of voting. And so if they're not going to be engaged in these midterms, regardless of how bad the Democrats are, it's going to be a long day for Republicans. So we need to bring them back in the fold if we want to keep this country on track.
Yeah, what do you think, Jonathan?
Yeah, there are no red-blooded American males that would admit to voting for Kamala Harris in 2024.
Any tariff revenue lost as a result of this ruling?
So, Maria, we were told that these tariffs were a tax on the individual, on the consumer in our country, and they all get passed along. Yet you don't see any companies lining up to hand out money back to consumers in our country. It's almost as if that was a false argument by the big business lobby that was bought into by the Supreme Court. Because otherwise, it'd be you and me getting these refunds, not massive companies. Right? So, again, President Trump's key trade initiative to reinvigorate manufacturing base in this country was undermined by his own party, by large lobbies, and played into by Supreme Court justices who are happy to play along with these legal arguments, whichever way the wind blows. So it's really disappointing, and I think you're seeing the nonsense play out in real time. Of course, no one's allowed to say that, that like this whole tariffs are a tax paid by the individual, which again was the crux of the argument. Why are we getting the refunds? Why is it only large importers?
Yeah, and there's a follow-up on Nike on that very issue. But Jonathan, let me get your take here. So they already passed it on, and now they want money from government again.
Maria, look, this is going to happen across the board. The entire argument was a nonsense. The point of the tariffs was to inspire companies to make things here in America.
Right.
Every other country does this in the world, yet somehow here it's this direct tax on the customer. If it was a direct tax on the customer, you and I should be the ones filing in the portal, not Nike, right? So again, it was a false argument. Okay, and the Supreme Court, again, undermining the agenda that would have benefited the United States of America.
Yeah, and these are national security issues, by the way. I mean, if corporate America just understood the national security threat that the president saw so clearly so long ago, maybe they didn't need tariffs to get their supply chains here. But for so
yeah, look, given the military success we had, not only with Maduro earlier this year, where again, Venezuela had all the latest and greatest Russian and Chinese technology, the absolute devastation we've done to Iran, again, with the latest and greatest of Russian and Chinese military technology, and with the assistance of Russia and China in the targeting exercises, I think President Trump is going in there holding all the cards. Right, so I'd expect a very positive outcome from there. And then from the markets, look, you know, we're looking a little bit overextended on some of these semiconductors and trades and some of these technology trades. But if you look at positioning on the street, like a lot of these names are under owned, and you're starting to see massive call buying, which means just because we're a little bit extended doesn't mean we can't get far more extended from here. So look, good things that come into America, and then something that's, you know, the market's still in debate about which software companies are going to benefit from this and not benefit from this. I can tell you right now, Palantir is extremely undervalued. They are on their way, and it's an absolute steal right here.
Yeah, look at Micron this morning, up 5.25%. We told everybody months ago, I reported that memory prices were soaring. Great to have you guys this morning. Thank you, Jonathan Fahey and Michael Lee. We will see you soon, guys. We'll be right back.
Thank you.